Ember. Okay, I'm Vic. I work here at Hashrocket. Hashrocket, we mostly do Rails, but every now and then we'll get a project that's very front-end heavy, and we got one this past year that I was working on since August, and we decided to go with front-end framework, and we decided to use Ember for a lot of reasons, and it worked out really well. I really like Ember. It's very Railsy, so if you use Rails, you'll feel right at home in Ember and the way it works. So I'm just going to give you guys sort of an overview, an intro with the keynote, and then I want to dig into some code and let you guys kind of ask questions and kind of drive the conversation from there. Okay. So Ember exists to solve a problem. If you've ever written a front-end heavy application with just JavaScript and jQuery, you've probably experienced it. You end up with something like this. Now this isn't bad code, it works, it gets the job done, but if you're going to pass this on to someone else, or you're going to come back in 6 months and be like, what did I do? That's really bad. So you have jQuery soup, you have a lack of conventions for how to do standard things. And then the hard things kind of like persistence and data binding and a variety of other things. There's just not sort of conventional, easy ways to do this. And that's what Ember kind of provides you with these three things. So it gives you the Ember object. So like in JavaScript, you have your vanilla JavaScript object. Ember has this Ember object, and it has all these things that make JavaScript development really easy. It's MVC. You have a route, a controller, a view, and then a template. So you really have 4 main objects, whereas in Rails you usually only have 3. You just have your model, controller, view. In Ember you have this additional thing called your route, which we'll get into. And then Ember has conventions for everything. Like in Rails, you usually, like say you have users. In your routes, you'll have resources for users. And you'll have a users controller, and then you'll have a users folder with your views for users, and etc. Ember works the same way. Everything goes kind of along with these names. So if you create like a user's resource, then everything automatically will look for the things that are named user. So that's really nice. So here's just an example of an Ember object. Like here's a view. And everything is contained. You've got hooks for certain things. And then you've just got functions and properties. And it's really simple. And then this is the entire code for this one view. And it actually does a lot. But so if I need to look at my project story view, I know where it is. I know all the JavaScript for that thing is right here. Okay, I'll show you guys something that I built with Ember so you can get an idea of kind of some of the harder things that it's able to accomplish. So this app is a project management app. It's sort of like Trello meets Pivotal Tracker. So you have a Kanban board. Let's see. Yeah, that was someone's project. Okay, yeah, so you have this Kanban board where everything goes through a process. It doesn't look great because this screen is really small. But you see here, you have these story arcs, which is like a feature set. You come in here, and so you have a story arc about, this is an example. This is your feature set name, and these are stories. And so you have to do a lot of things here. Like if I want to show the story, I gotta click on it, and then there's stuff here. And then I want to change the status to finished. And I'm going to close this out. So now it's finished. And that needs to be persisted. So notice it's blue, that means finished. If I refresh, it's good, it's saved. And that's all really easy with Ember. And then there's this thing here, where I'm going to start it, and then this is, the button's going to change here. So I start, and now my status is started, but the next action is finished. So all this stuff, Ember makes really easy through functions, properties, observers, and things like that. And then the persistence is all really easy too. So that's just an example where if you didn't use Ember, something like this could really be a mess. Okay, So why Ember? We sort of talked about it, but the summary is that unorganized, unmaintainable code is technical debt, and that's the opposite of what you want. So with objects, conventions, data binding, oh yeah, these are all the things that Ember gives you. Yeah, so all of those are what you get kind of out of the box, and they're all really helpful in their own ways. And Ember works really well with CoffeeScript. How many people here use CoffeeScript or know it? Okay, a lot of people. So some of you don't. CoffeeScript is just a layer on top of JavaScript that makes the language a little more succinct, a little more readable. So here's an example. If you, in JavaScript, you say function, say hello, and you have all that. CoffeeScript, it takes out a lot of the noise. Your function is just going to look like that. And then another feature of CoffeeScript is instead of doing this dot, you can just use the @ symbol, which is really useful in Ember because you do that all the time. And then also, you have the little arrow there. Sometimes you need to pass in the parent context, and to do that, you just use that arrow. And that's helpful a lot too. So these are the main things that Ember objects do. I'm going to go over each of these and kind of how they work. Functions are functions. They work the same. You just put a function in your Ember object, and then you can call it on that object. Properties are kind of unique. So you specify the property name, and then like this is a computer property for full name. So I want to concatenate first name and last name. So I have to get them, concatenate them, and then in the property line down here, I list the things that I want it to watch. So when either one of those changes, this property will refresh. And that happens all the time with like, you know, anything you're doing that's interactive, or if you have counters or anything, you're going to use properties a lot. Also another note, you can use just vanilla JavaScript properties. Like I could just say full name colon Billy Joe, and it would just work. It'll wrap that for me. I don't have to use this, I don't have to wrap it in the parentheses in the function if you just start using like a string or a boolean or a number or something, and it's not watching anything. Observers work kind of the same way. You just give it the name, and then the function you want it to run, and then what it's observing. So whenever if full name changed, then this would log name changed. And so you can observe other computed properties. You don't have to observe the uncomputed ones. Getters and setters work like this, just this.get, this.set. Very simple. And these things can reach through. So you pass it a string to tell it what you want, but they can reach through. So like if you're inside a view and you need to get to the model, you can just set and do controller.model.firstName, and it'll reach all the way through. And then what you want to change it to is the second parameter there. So that's kind of an overview of like the different things Ember objects do and how they work. Now I'm going to talk about the specific objects that you'll see. Starting with the model. So model is sort of like the Rails model. It has persistent data, has relationships, has many, belongs to, and so how you might instantiate it would be like that. Like, oh whoops, that's wrong. That should say model, but you get the idea. That's how you instantiate a route. So the route gets data from the server. It's the first thing that's hit. And it uses data to set up the controller, and it has hooks. It can access lots of other things in the application really easily. So if you're doing setup work, you always want to do it in the route. If you're calling out to other things, you want to do it in the route. And it's got all these different hooks that you can use. Yeah.
So if you have a model that handles your persistence, does that go through your route to get there, or is that completely separate?
So the route just sets up the controller with the correct model. And then once you have the model, you can just call save on it from anywhere, and that will persist it.
Okay, but the thing that tells it like what URL to go to is the route.
Yeah. So you start with.
How does the model knows how to persist itself?
Okay. So then you're getting into backend stuff, which I was going to talk about a little later. But basically, we use it inside Rails. You don't have to. You can point it to any API. We've been using it inside Rails, and that works really well, just with active model serializers. So Ember has an active model adapter, so it'll read in the data and create the model with the correct attributes.
So, like, is that a property of the model, the API endpoint that should, send a request to?
Is it, sorry?
No, like, is the model aware of the
URL?
API endpoint? Yeah, of the URL, basically. It should hit to save or something.
Yeah. Yeah,
Or
usually.
Or is that router?
Is it, so there's also router, yeah. I don't know if that,
Right.
I can get into some code. I'll show you guys code
Cool.
later, but basically it starts with you hit a URL. Say you're writing a blog. You hit the URL, you hit posts. Okay? So then in Ember you have a router, like your Rails router, that specifies posts is a resource. And then so that's going to look for the posts route in your Ember app. And then that's going to trickle down to controller view template. It'll make sense when I show some code. But these are some of the hooks that the route has. So you can do things. The ones you use most often will be model instead of controller. And then deactivate, like if you need to destroy something when you close out or whatever, deactivate is a good place to do that. The controller's logic that's not specific to setup. It can also sort of act as a decorator for the model if your models are getting big, but it doesn't have to. The idea is mainly it marshals data between the model, the route, and then to the view. And there's actually three types. There's controller, object controller, and array controller. Mostly they function the same, but when you're actually working with data from a server, first if you will wrap that data with your controller. So if you have a single record, you use object controller. If you have an array of records, you use array controller. And then the array controller can do things like specify how you want to sort it and things like that. A lot of times the pattern you'll see is you'll have an array controller that's like wraps a bunch of users or a bunch of posts or whatever, and then you'll iterate over those and then instantiate an object controller for each object.
So your array controller is a collection of object controllers?
No, it has a collection of objects, model objects,
Okay.
but then you can iterate over them and then instantiate
Okay.
the object controllers. Yeah.
Cool.
So the view is a representation of an actual DOM element. So this is helpful if you want to have logic around what HTML attributes and CSS classes you want to have. Maybe you want something to show an error, maybe you want something to be a bright color, whatever. You can use functions and properties to set those. Views can handle JavaScript events, and this is where you want to put like your jQuery that's specific to your view. Like if you're doing animations, you're hiding and showing something, whatever that's specific to presentation will go in your view. Draggable and sortable stuff will go in there too. And finally, you have your template. It's just your markup. You write it in handlebars. We've been using this thing called Emblem. It's sort of like Haml for handlebars. It makes it really nice, and I like it a lot. And then in your template, you can also specify actions. So like, you could click on a div, and that div could have an action, and then that action will just call a function of the same name in your controller. So if the action is like, show alert, it'll call a function called show alert in your controller. So that's how you kind of bubble things up from there. So if you were to make an analogy to Rails, it's kind of like this. The main differences are that in Rails you just have a controller, in Ember you have a route and a controller. They sort of do the same thing. And then your view in Rails is really your template in Ember. And then there's not really an analogy for an Ember view to Rails. It really would just be like a containing div or something.
Like a section of the template?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it can be a view can be anything. Anytime you want to put logic inside around a DOM element, then you can make it a view.
But it's not markup.
It replaces markup.
So a button can be a view.
A button can be a view, but it doesn't have to be. Like you could just
Okay.
have a button be a button in your template. But if you're going to have a bunch of logic around the properties and CSS classes, then you might want to make it a view. And then you insert the view into the template.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the objects all communicate with each other in different ways. Like in the route, this is sort of what we're talking about. When you hit the route, there's a function called model, and its job is to get the actual record that you want. in this case, like if you're using Ember Data, which is the library to work with backends, you would say store.find post 1. And so then it's going to make an AJAX request to posts looking for the post with ID of 1. And whatever that returns, that's going to be your model for the controller and the route. And so then you have the setup controller function. So say if I'm coming to this route and I want to highlight this object in my UI, it needs to know that it's active. So I'm going to tell this model that it's active. And then I can use that later on in the view to color it or give it a different CSS class. And then another kind of funny thing about Ember is that, so if the setup controller function, if you're actually implementing it, you need to make sure to call controller set model to model. So this will set the model on the controller to whatever is the result of this model function.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do you do this a lot? This pattern?
Yeah, you do.
Is there a way to touch like view from within the route? So for example, if you want to highlight the model, you don't set a property of the model because this technically doesn't have anything to do with model. You just want like the view representation, like the model to blink or highlight or something.
Yeah, you could set something on the controller also. That'd be a way to do it. You probably don't want your route talking directly to your view. But yeah, you could definitely set a property on the controller instead of the model. And then the view can just look at the controller. Yeah.
And just skip the model completely?
Yeah, you're sort of preventing the view from reaching it too far if you did that. I mean, that might be a good thing to do.
Because if you did it this way, like, and you're going to persist the model, active will get pushed to the server as a property.
If it is defined, so you define, in your model you define which attributes are persisted attributes from the server.
Okay.
So you can also have non-persisted attributes. So if it's not persisted attribute, it doesn't matter. But yes, if you did, if active was a persisted attribute and you did set and then you called save, then yeah, it would be persistent.
The store and the save functions, or the find and the save functions, do those conform to just standard RESTful, like what I would consider like Rails style REST?
Yes. Yes.
And that's based off of the fixture adapter?
No, it's based off, so Ember Data has an active model adapter, so it'll just use that. And it'll
if you wanted to override that, say you had a custom route, is that something that is easily doable?
Yeah, you can do that. I don't remember the exact way how, but I know it's possible.
Yeah, just a quick question about this piece of code. Like, say you set a property of the model, and this model will like hang around for some time, and now, for example, you have to highlight this model one more time.
Yeah.
And it is already active.
I need to highlight it again?
Yeah, like how to highlight it again if you cannot say active true, set active true because it's already active. It will not change the active property, and therefore it will not be highlighted.
Well, the way this would work probably is like the view is going to have, the view will give the UI element a class if it's active. So as long as it's active, it'll have that class, CSS class.
It'll be data bound to active. So as long as it's active, it'll be active in the view. You don't have to worry about that.
Okay, cool.
So in the case of like you've already had a model that was active, you'd use like deallocate or was the one
deactivate.
Deactivate.
Yeah, so
I just have to active.
Yeah, exactly. And in the route, yeah, exactly. I have another function here called deactivate and set active to false on the model. Definitely. So controller. Here's what like an object controller might look like if you're doing one for a user. And the first part here is how it might communicate to a model. So if you want to have a function that changes the first name, you just pass that in, and then you set model that first name to the new thing. So the controller can just get at the model by just doing add get and add set model. And then for the controller to communicate down to the view, you usually trigger things. So you have to extend this thing called Ember evented. It's just an events library. So I can call trigger start animation, and then the view can subscribe to those events, and that's a good way to do it.
So then the view will be listening for start animation and then do whatever.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then here's a view. And so here you have exactly that. You have hooks in your views also. So there's a did insert element hook which fires when immediately after the element has been inserted into the DOM. So this is exactly what I was just saying. This would listen for a trigger called start animation and then call start animation function that's inside itself. So this right away this would change the CSS to left 200. And this is another feature. Since the view is actually a representation of a DOM element, you can get at that element by just doing at buck, and that'll grab that in the DOM with jQuery. So that's really nice.
What's the at get? Is that like get this view's controller?
Yes.
How does the view know its controller?
The setup controller that happened.
The view knows its controller based on where it is. So like.
Okay.
So one view can only belong to one controller.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like a view can be just inside a template, and then it'll have the same controller as the controller of that template.
Okay.
Or if it's being rendered directly, like you hit a route and it'll go route controller view template. So then it'll just have the controller above it. It sounds kind of tricky, but if you actually look at it, it's not. So here's what
I got a question about that last bit of code.
Yeah.
So were you saying this on start element animation, you're passing in this dot start animation with a fat rocket there, so that's like a bound function to this, and then start animation here has a dash rocket. Is there like is there a reason why it needs to be like that, or should the start animation be a fat rocket? I'm just like
yeah, you just put start fat rocket into start animation and just pass the reference to the method.
But or is there a reason?
The same way.
I'm not sure exactly what that would do. I know that you needed the fat arrow there, but maybe you could put it here also, or instead.
Yeah, you can
I'm not
put
sure.
the fat rocket there instead of thing.
Yeah.
But I didn't know there was some reason for it. So. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, you just had to do it just past the context. So this is a template in emblem. If you just want plain text, you need to start with a pipe. Emblem's different in Haml in that the first thing you type on any line, it will try and parse it as an HTML element. So for plain text, you need to tell it pipe. So here's how this might work. Like say you have in your controller a property called active user count. You can just do equal active user count and it'll display it there. And then to iterate over something, say the controller for this template was an array controller. You could do each user in users and then call render here. So what render is going to do inside a template is then instantiate another controller view template for each one of these, and this will look for the user controller, and then it will give it this user model here.
So it's like a render, a partial and reverse.
Yeah, it's a lot like a partial, and so in Ember you actually have 3 ways you can render new things in a template. You can do render, you can do view, or you can do partial. So render gives you controller, view, and template. View gives you just view and template. And then partial just gives you template. So it depends on how much you need to do.
Where does that users collection come from? Is that like controller.users, or is that a controller named users? Like
so that would work. This would work if the array if the controller for this template was an array controller and it was the user's controller.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've seen in the past, like when I was trying to learn Ember, that they would just say user and controller.
You could also do that.
Okay.
And then
this does a lookup for users. Like so, this would work too, but if you said controller, it would just work.
It would also, and then if you did, what did you say? Each user and controller.
Yeah, if you said each user and controller.
Yeah, I think that would work too. I think you could also do each controller, and then instead of saying user here, you would say this. But I don't know if I like that as much because it's not very clear.
When you say render user, the one in quotes is the name of the view or template, and then user is the object for user there that you're passing to it?
Yes, but render tells it to start at a controller.
Okay.
So it'll always get down.
So it's
So
looking for
you're
a
naming
user
controller there, not a view? You're saying render the user controller, not render user view?
Well, you render the user controller, but then a controller is always going to look for then a view and a template.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you have to have a user controller there also.
Yes, you have to have a user.
I think you can specify the controller you want to use to render it as well.
Yeah, well that's the first option. So if you want to just pass the user model to whatever bicycles, you could use the bicycles controller, but probably not. So yeah, let me go back. That's a very common pattern. Whenever you're iterating over something, this is probably what you'll do. So Ember and Rails, like I was saying before, works well together. Active model serializers. You end up with pretty thin API controllers, and then the Ember app itself lives in a Rails view. So you just make sure to give it the right JavaScripts, and then you have a script tag that outputs handlebars, and you put a tag in there called outlet. Outlet in Ember is like yield in Rails. So you have a tag in there called outlet, and then the Ember app will just load up depending on what the URL is. And the Ember app will look at a URL, like you can have your Rails URL, and then you have a hash, and then you have your Ember URL. So it's kind of up to you how much of your app, if you put it inside Rails, it's up to you how much of your app you want to be Rails and how much you want to be Ember. So if like the project we did, we have a decent amount of stuff that's just Rails just because it was a little bit quicker, and we have our whole toolchain set up there, like for authentication. So then we just use Ember for this one page that's really front-end heavy, and that works really well. So testing is very important. Our test environment, Ember comes with a bunch of testing helpers. It's kind of like Capybara. You have click, fill in, visit, all the things you need. So we use those with QUnit, which is a JavaScript test runner, and then MockJax to mock requests. And that works really well. We really liked it. And the thing with it is like you end up, it's so quick. Like QUnit is very fast, so much faster than Cucumber. You end up kind of wanting to write more tests, and you can do more granular integration tests. They're very quick and easy to write. And then we use Cucumber to, like, we started off doing a lot of Cucumber and then moved more into QUnit as we moved forward. But if I were to do a new app, I'd probably just use a few Cucumber scenarios just to check that the Rails side of things is working properly, that the persistence is there, kind of as a sanity check, and then use QUnit for the rest of it. And you can use other JavaScript test runners. QUnit is what the Ember core team uses, and it's sort of the standard, but you can do whatever you want. The Ember testing helpers have adapters for different frameworks.
Can you make any examples of how you use QUnit for integration testing? Because it seems like a unit test framework, more like unit test.
Yeah. So
How do you do integration tests?
This is an example. Yeah. And you can do unit tests also. Unit tests aren't quite as easy, but you can do them. So here's like a test. If I'm testing, this is something we wrote. You're visiting a page builder. So you start with module. You give it a setup and teardown function. We just have extracted that to standard functions. And then you have test, comma, function. So you visit the page, and then you're going to click a button that says start editing. You're going to click, then you're going to go back and click the link that says page settings and say make sure that the first input got parameterized. So then that thing works. And that runs really fast.
It's like a bar.
Huh?
It's like a bar.
Yeah, like Capybara. The testing helpers are.
So the .then is just how you start your assertion.
Okay. Yeah. So sort of the .then. Do you know about JavaScript like promises?
Yeah.
Sort of. Okay. So a promise is this JavaScript object that waits for asynchronous requests to finish. And so Ember has a promise object, and you can create one. And so then just waits for whatever happens here, any asynchronous JavaScript to finish.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can end up using that a lot when you're writing tests.
So that's going to wait until anything that, when you click A or the page settings, it's just going to wait for whatever happens after that to finish and then do the assertion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So some other things about Ember that are kind of unique. Nested routes means nested UI. So if you have like posts 1, or if you have like projects posts 1, that means you have like project. Let me just see if I have this on the outside, or say a project and story. Project on the outside, story on the inside. It's not like you're going to a different page, and that's very different from Rails. And so the way this works here is you have, this is like your Ember router, it's like your Rails router. You tell it the resources that you have. So if I have a project resource, I tell it what the path is, and then I have :project ID, so that's what's called the dynamic segment. So when you pass, so when this hits the route, you'll have access to this, so you know what ID to look up to get the right project. And then inside this project resource, I have a story route. So I'd end up with like projects 1, stories 1, and that's going to give me a UI like this. And the way this works is inside the project template, you have another outlet tag, which is like your yield, so that the story has a place to show up. And you can't forget that outlet tag, because then you're going to go crazy being like, where's my thing? It's not here. So that's why you set up.
So if you have a nested resource, you never get back like the entire tree of nested resources. You only get back the one, and then it makes other calls for the other stuff. Like if you have a project /1, and then you have 5 stories on that, you shouldn't return that all in one request, right? It just goes and gets the other 5.
That's going to depend on how you set up your active model serializers.
But with that way, it wouldn't do it, right?
With that way, it would just reach out to project 1.
Okay.
But project 1 might include that information, depending if you include it in your serializer.
Right.
But it doesn't have to, yeah. And then, so resource and route are kind of tricky. You probably, if you're interested, just look those up in the API. The gist of it is that resource, if you call resource, it creates in memory a bunch of different, it's sort of like resources in a Rails route. You're going to have an index, a show, an edit, a new,
delete.
Yeah, destroy. Whereas route is just like one thing. And another unique thing with Ember, so if I do route story, okay, this is going to look for since it's inside project, it's going to look for project story controller here. And then, but I may not have project story controller. I may only have project story view and project story template. And that's fine. It'll just create it in memory. You don't have to create all the objects. Or I could create the controller and skip the view and just do a controller and a template. Or just a template. It doesn't matter. It'll create in memory the objects that you didn't specify. So that can be nice, so you don't have a bunch of objects.
Could you have done a resource there for story, or is that like?
I could have.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you had multiple nested routes, would you just name your outlets? Like I've seen people pass a string and outlet. I never knew what it was doing, but is that what that?
You can do named outlets, yes, and then yeah. So you can. This is called an unnamed outlet, and then you can do outlet and then pass it a string, and then I could say outlet bicycles, and then call a function somewhere else in my application called render template, and render any template I want into the named outlet. So if you need to get kind of manual, you can.
Well, if you just named that one story, would everything still work just like this?
No.
So you have to go in and do it that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
For nested routes, it's going to look for the unnamed outlet. Yeah.
Does it mean that you still can like render project view without a story, like that just outlet will return empty string or something?
You're saying what would happen if there wasn't?
Yeah, like if you just want to return a project without a story,
Okay.
what would happen with this outlet? It will just
Nothing. Like if I just went to projects 1, the outlet's not going to do anything.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Good questions. So JavaScript integration testing can be really fast. I clocked it today. It can be up to 25 times faster than Cucumber. So if you had a 10-minute test suite, it could run in 30 seconds. But that's up to 25 times faster. So if you use Flatware, which is a gem that helps you fan out Cucumber to different cores, it's only like 10 times faster. Still pretty good though. And then this isn't exactly a fair comparison because I ran this cucumber test on a new app. It wasn't really doing a lot. I mean, sorry, I ran the QUnit test on a newer app that wasn't doing a lot. And if you had a really complex app, the QUnit tests could run a lot slower, and also depending on how many requests you mock. But I think that this is sort of the promise to where if you set up your testing environment right, and if you have like really fast mocking and really fast testing, there's a promise for it to be really fast because it doesn't have to boot up a server. QUnit just runs on your local server, and that's really interesting and kind of exciting. So the testing environment is good now. You can write unit tests pretty well. Sometimes they're hard, and that's just sort of the nature of it. Like, there's so many objects are reaching out to all these other objects, so then you're kind of just asserting messages. But sometimes to assert messages, you then have to actually create the object. You can't just do doubles. So
do you find yourself building like a large graph when you do testing?
Sometimes, yeah. So that's sort of one thing I would like to be better, but I know they are working on it. And then one thing that I would like would be like an easy way to fabricate objects for tests instead of, because right now with like if you use RubyJax, or Ember comes with a fixture adapter that you can use to just mock requests or mock data. That's nice, but then you just kind of have all this stuff in a file, and it's kind of hard to get at. What I would rather have would be something like Fabrication Gem for Rails or for Ruby, so that you can tell it just the objects you want to create, and then it's smart enough to automatically mock the requests for you. I think that would be better. So, when should you use Ember? Here's what I think. If you have a really interactive, heavy front-end, multi-page application, I think definitely you should use Ember, or at least take a look at it. I think it's really good. If you have an interactive single-page application, I think you could consider putting Ember on that one page and do the rest in Rails, if that makes it easier. That's what we did, and it worked well. And this is kind of a third one that is interesting. I don't know if many people would think about it, but if you're doing a big CRUD application that's got a bunch of interactive forms that are maybe just moderately interactive, you might want to use Ember, because you kind of reach a tipping point to where if you're writing enough JavaScript, Ember is going to speed you up, and your code is going to be more organized and better, and just you're going to have a more enjoyable development experience overall, instead of kind of fighting the JavaScript. So when not to use Ember. If you have no JavaScript, if you're doing a static page, you probably don't need Ember. You could use it anyway, but you know, why? If you have just occasional JavaScript, then it might not make sense. There's definitely a development overhead to learning everything and getting everything to work. So you shouldn't feel bad if you don't use Ember in that case. And then if you just have a non-interactive application that's just, you know, static pages and stuff, then you don't really need it. And in that case also, that's sort of the same thing.
RubyJax flew in.
It's JS.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I hope that's a joke. So problems. Ember's not SEO friendly right out of the gate, because Google has trouble crawling Ajax sites. So that's not really good. But Google's working on new Ajax crawlers. And then there are also other ways to get around this problem. One of the ways is to create a static snapshot of your site. And then when Google hits your site, you use a hash and then a bang. If you use a hash and a bang in your URL structure, then Google will replace that with literally underscore escaped underscore fragment underscore. So you can use that to, and then you can use that to serve up HTML files conditionally. So I wrote something that's basically does that. It's a work in progress, but it didn't take me long just to show you that this isn't a very hard problem to solve. If you really need SEO for an Ember app, a lot of the times you won't, because if you're building an app, you're probably going to have authentication. A lot of things are going to be behind these auth walls that Google wouldn't even get to anyways. So may not be a problem for you. You can just do your Rails, you can do your marketing pages in Rails. Ember puts script tags all over the DOM. This is where it keeps information about all the different things that are going on. It's kind of annoying, but also if you are like looking at things in the DOM, most of the time you're inspecting one element, and so you just inspect it and then you see it, and the script tags don't really bother you. And then also they're working on a thing, Ember core team is working on a thing called HTML bars that will get rid of the script tags. And I pinged them this week. They said this is kind of the projected dates. It might be longer, but it kind of gives you an idea. Like probably in 6 months we'll definitely have it. So that'll be nice. Another problem you can have with Ember is just like you can end up with a lot of objects because you can have up to 4 objects for everything you're doing all over your system, and that can sometimes be difficult if you have too many objects. But that's it's not so bad. I'd rather have more objects than spaghetti code. So it's kind of you just roll with the punches there. And then also, if you're not using objects, they're defined in memory. So if you have an object, it's doing something. It's encapsulating code for some purpose. So it's not so bad. Front-end apps are just complicated by nature.
It's about browser portability. I mean, it's work in all browsers.
Mm-hmm.
There's any problem using multiple browsers?
As far as I know, it works in all browsers. I don't know how far back in Internet Explorer it goes. Yeah, but all modern browsers, obviously.
I think it's 6 right now. The Travis CI build against 6.
It works in IE6?
I thought so.
Wow.
It's
really good.
I think so.
Feel sorry for whoever had to like
Get that to work.
Yeah, get that to work. Yeah, so kind of in conclusion, your advantages are all the things I talked about. And then I was going to show you a rock, paper, scissors app I built and then go through the code, but this computer is having issues setting up the database. You can at least get in the code though.
Wait, it doesn't work?
What are you trying to set up?
Well, it's given me, let's see. Maybe you guys can. I'm trying to create it. I think it's you just don't have Postgres app running.
You have to create DB?
Yeah, it's not even running.
There you go.
Nice. Sweet.
Neat.
There shouldn't be anything in here. I don't think there's any models. Okay.
Postgres has a lot of overhead, so you don't want to start it first.
Nothing.
Shut up.
Same thing.
Sweet.
Yeah. You don't want to start Redis until you need it because it's so heavy.
Oh, the screen's too small.
Is that small?
Love your baby hands.
There it goes. Okay.
Is that your hands?
No. I found these on Google Images. I was going to make this one like robot hands because it's AI, but I didn't find any good robot hands for this. Yeah. So this is very simple. You just click on it. Whoop, cycles through the different options. Rock, paper, scissors. And
Is
then
that random?
This isn't. This cycles rock, paper, scissors. But this is an AI that will throw randomly
Okay.
when you play, and that has a counter for what's been happening. So,
How do we know that it doesn't know what you picked already?
You don't.
It's open source.
Trust. Just trust.
Yeah. What's that quote from War Games? It's like, I don't know.
I don't know.
You can't win the game. I don't know. All right, what do y'all want to throw?
Rock.
No. All right, paper wins. So they bounce up and down, play. They bounce up and down, and then watch this button becomes disabled. And then the counter gets incremented, the message shows, then the message fades, the button becomes undisabled. And then also when I click, the AI hand gets reset back to rock. So a lot of things are happening, actually.
I love the set smiling.
Wait,
Do you have the Ember inspector installed?
Probably not on this computer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Angular inspector.
Maybe next month. Computer Angular stuff.
Yeah, there's an Ember inspector. It's really good. It helps a lot for just learning what's going on. It shows you all the routes that are in your application, so that can kind of take, like in Rails, you can always do rake routes. In Ember, that's a good way to do it. Just use the Ember inspector for Chrome. So let's look at the code for this. So everything's an app. Let's see. App assets, JavaScripts. So here we have all the different folders for everything: controllers, helpers, models, routes, penalties. So let's look at the router to start. So there's only one route in here. It's just a table resource. It could have been a route, and I specify the path is just root. So that's why I'm getting this here. So if I went to here, it would do the same thing.
What if you do table there?
That won't work because
because you're overriding.
the path is here. Yeah, if I didn't put anything here, it would just default, path would default to table.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's no sub-routes or sub-resources. It just didn't need them for this app. So let's follow the kind of chain of events here. The first thing we'd look for is a table route. So let's see. This is, sorry, the root as well. So app assets, JavaScript routes. But there's no, let's see, wait, here's the table route. So let's see what this does. Nothing. It's just here.
Do you have to do that?
No, I shouldn't even need to be here. I actually removed it, but didn't push it yet on my other computer. So the route's not doing anything. So what's the next place we were going to look?
Controller.
Yeah. Good job. So there's only one controller. It's the table controller. All right. So there's a bunch of stuff in here. Can y'all see this? Should I make it white?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Can you make it bigger?
Yeah, a little bit better would be nice.
Plus.
Tell me when to stop.
Plus.
That's good.
Okay.
I think.
Good, John?
Yeah.
All right. Cool. You guys feel free to stop, ask questions whenever. So here we have just these vanilla JavaScript properties, which I told you Ember will wrap. So that's totally fine. I want to default all these to 0.
I have a question.
Yep.
The evented, what is
Yep.
that at the end of the extended?
So yeah, Ember evented, that's the events library that you use when you call trigger to then trigger things in the views.
Okay.
Use that for most of the time. That's how you want to communicate from a controller to a view, is you trigger something.
Okay. Okay.
So it's like include module in Ruby.
And that's, so anytime you have clicks and things, you're usually using events for that?
No, clicks, the views will handle themselves.
Okay.
Clicks will be handled in two different ways. So the view itself can have a function on it called click, and then that'll run whenever you click that view.
Okay.
And you can do that for any of the JavaScript events. But then also, you could have inside the template on an element, say you just have a button, you can have button and then say click equals clicked button. And then that's going to call a function called clicked button
On the controller.
on the controller.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are the two ways that would be handled. So here we have the new game function. It's going to set this variable is playing to true. So then we're in a state of playing. And it's going to trigger a couple things. Trigger reset hand, which will reset the AI hand, and then bounce, which will bounce both of them. And then it's just doing this thing called Ember run later, which is like set timeout, but Ember wants you to do this instead of set timeout, so we can keep everything in what's called the Ember run loop, which is another presentation entirely. But basically it's set timeout, and you just pass the context, the function you want it to call, and then how long you want it to wait. For this, I have a constant, and I think it's a good idea to keep any kind of durations or animations in constants, so that then when you go to write your tests, you can set them all to 0 or 1, and then your tests run super fast. And then also it's just nice if you want to go tweak your animations, you have one file where you go do that. So after 3 seconds or whatever, game over gets called. This is where the AI is going to choose which hand to throw. You have a function called determine winner, which figures out who won, and then you're going to trigger determine winner returns a string, either win, loss, or tie, and then this will trigger an event with that name, and same thing here with update stats. We'll take that and increment those properties. So Ember has a bunch of little helpers. Here's one, it's called increment property. So you just pass it the property name, and it'll increment it by 1. So if I won, this will be a string that says win. So then that's going to look for win count, and then it will just increment the win count by 1. So that's nice. And then, yeah. Okay. The determine winner function. This is another way to communicate with views. I don't think it's as good as a way as triggering stuff, but sometimes you have to just do it. Because Ember doesn't give you a super easy way to just grab the view, because I think it wants you to separate their concerns. But if you have to do it, one way you can get at a view is just by doing Ember view views, and then that gives you, Ember view views returns a array of your views with their IDs as the keys. So the view, 2 hand views that I have, one has the ID of human, the other has the ID of AI. So I can just get at them that way, and then ask what their current type is. So then that's how this determines who won or lost. And this looks at just this thing called beat table, which just has what beats what. So that's how that works. So after the controller, what are we going to look at?
The view.
Yeah. There's lots of views here. Let's look at the table view. Okay, so this is our actual representation of sort of like the game area. It's a section with the class name of table. So that's how you do that, just tag name and class names, and you can give it multiple class names. You would just do that with a comma here. And then on did insert element, which is this hook we have, this is where it's subscribing to all those trigger events. And for each trigger event, it'll call a different function. These functions just show the message that said you won or you lost. And then they show it for this app constant message duration. Okay, so last thing to look at in this array of items, the template. So here's the table template, an emblem. So here are just the stats. There's my H3. And then here are my 2 hands. So here since I'm calling view, it's only going to render a view and then a template. So this will look for each of those views. And then you can also pass it information. So I want to tell it this is one's on the left, and I want to get it the ID of human. I can do that right here. I can give this one right and the ID of AI. And so sometimes that's useful if like the template you're inside knows information that that view wouldn't otherwise know.
Where are you printing the table image?
The table image?
Is it in the application?
It's in just the style sheet. It's just a background image on the class name table.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dig into this. That the human hand view and the AI hand view both extend from one view called hand view. So let's look at that. This is kind of a lot. Given it class names, and then here's class name binding. So this is interesting. So what this is going to do is look for a function called hand type, and then give it the class name of whatever, look for a property called hand type, and give it the class name of whatever that property returns.
What, a property on what? The controller?
Property on the view right here.
Oh, okay.
So this is looking at this and saying, okay, hand type is the side which we passed in. It was either left or right. And then current type is rock, paper, or scissors. So this will get a class of like left rock or right paper. And then in my style sheet, I have those all the styles which give it the correct image. So that's really cool. And then it watches the side and the current type so it can make sure to update. properly. On data insert element, again, we're just subscribing to that bounce trigger. And then this is what's actually bouncing it. And there's the app constant for bounce duration. Current type looks in app constants for the different hand types based on just this type index number that can be 0, 1, or 2. So that's how it determines a hand. Let's see. So let's look at the human hand view and see what it does differently. It only does two things. So it extends hand view, so that just inherits from there. It'll use everything that's in there. But then you can override any of its functions if you want to. You can also override and then call super. So that's really helpful.
And is that a Ember thing or a CoffeeScript thing? CoffeeScript.
Yeah. So here we have the click we were talking about. So this is when you click on the human hand, it changes to, it cycles through the different options. So it's calling change type, and then change type just gets the type index, increments it by 1. I could have used increment property there. And then if it reaches 3, it just resets back to 0 so that it cycles through. Okay. Let's see what else I want to show you. Okay. Yeah, so the hands don't have templates because they don't need them. They just are the DOM elements that they are. So that's another example where just things you don't use are created in memory.
So it's basically just a div with different class names.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sweet.
And I think that's, let's see, no, there was another view. I have Vim projections that I don't have on this computer, so. Play button. So this is the button that you click to play. Similar kind of thing, you give it, so this view represents an input. It's an input with type submit, so that's why it's a submit button. Has class attribute bindings. So attribute bindings is the same idea as the class name bindings. So this is looking for a property called value and just gives it that. Same thing with type. And then disabled starts out as false. And then I come in here and I have another property called disabled. Actually, this shouldn't be that way. This should not exist.
Instead of tag name right there, you could just specify template and it could just be an input in there, in the template?
You could do that. So if you don't specify tag name, it's just div by default.
Oh, okay. Okay.
The reason you usually want to specify the tag name where your div starts is because if I want to have some kind of animation or run some jQuery, I can get at the actual element like that.
If you specify tag name?
Yeah.
And if you don't, you can't?
If I don't, it would show or hide the containing div. But if I want to like run things on the specific...
Oh, like find something inside of there or something?
You could find something inside also. I mean, if you're finding something inside, it wouldn't matter if you had if you specified the tag name or not. But if you wanted to like, if you wanted to run jQuery on that specific element, you want to, like if you're doing a sortable or a draggable,
okay.
like you can do this dot sortable. And that's just a little, I think, more conventional than doing like this dot find, UL sortable. Because you could do that if you didn't use tag name.
Well, couldn't you just pass UL in the boot there?
Oh yeah, you could probably do that too.
You're not sure.
Yeah.
But why do you need the tag name to do that?
Oh, I'm saying if you didn't use the tag name, you'd have to say UL.
Okay.
Otherwise, you could just do that.
I see.
Yeah. And then if you want the class names and the attribute bindings on the correct thing, you need to use tag name.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So disabled. So like if you want an input to be disabled, you give it disabled equals disabled in HTML. So here, disabled will say return the string of disabled if you're playing. Otherwise, it'll just be null and it won't be disabled. And then this watch is playing. And so this is looking at this playing, but it doesn't know about that. It gets that from here. So you have this playing, and there's this thing called computed alias. So if I'm using isPlaying all over the place, I'd have to be saying controller is playing, because that's where it gets the information. Because the controller for this view is the table controller, because that's what it's inside. So instead of saying controller is playing everywhere, I make a computed alias, just is playing, and then I can use that instead. So that's good for shortening things. And then Ember computed comes with a lot of other really nice things. Like I think there's like 10 or more different things. You can do computed bool, computed not, computed invert. So like a computed bool would return the Boolean value of whatever this is. Computed invert would invert the value, and things like that. So a computed not is what that is actually.
Cool.
Yeah. So that's kind of how that works, and that's pretty nice, I think. And I think that's all of the different objects in the system.
How long did it take you to make this?
Not that long. I think maybe like 3 hours or something, 3 or 4. Not that long.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's good. So, yeah, that's how that works. Any more questions about that?
Is jQuery a hard dependency of Ember?
Yes. And so that's it.
Thank you.
You need to lead jQuery. You should.
Question: how do you tie those into your validations and Rails? Like, you know, somebody types in their name and has an ampersand in it.
Oh yeah, how that? Yeah.
That's a good question.
Just, yeah,
there are Ember validation libraries. I haven't used them, but they make it easy, I think, to like show an error or whatever, prevent submission of invalid data.
You still have a validation in the model, the Rails model, and then when you call save, Ember would call save and send an update or a create action. Your controller would call save, and then validation would go out, and then it would send back an error request, and you can see it.
Yeah.
So on the meetup page, it said that if you like Rails, you'll probably like Ember. What if you don't like Rails? Is it still possible to like Ember?
That's a good question.
So it's why you don't like Rails. This is the question: why you don't like Rails?
That would probably be a long conversation.
Yeah, I know. Just kidding.
Short version, too much magic.
There's a decent amount of magic in Ember, but you can always find the JavaScript. So it's not. I wouldn't say it's as magical as Rails.
The only dependency on Rails that you have right here really is the Ember rest, right? Or
Ember data?
Ember data. Like if you remove Ember data and just use jQuery Ajax for you hit whatever endpoint you want as long as they're returning JSON.
But that rock paper scissors didn't use Rails at all, right?
No.
What was he using in Postgres?
The other app.
Well, yeah, it was just using it as a server. He doesn't really need it, just to show it inside a Rails view. Like I didn't need to do that inside Rails, but that's yeah. I have the tool chain all set up, so yeah, it was just easier. Like you can do it. You can use. There's a thing called Ember App Kit. It makes it a bit easier to use Ember just standalone. I haven't used it, but like my experience is that I like the Rails tool chain a lot, and throwing Ember in there is super easy. So I don't have a strong motivation to take it out just yet. But if I was doing like a client project and I was hitting a third-party API, then it would make a lot more sense to have it be standalone. So, yeah.
So in your code examples, you had like for user and users. Does Ember do pluralization like automatically like Rails? Like if you define user model, it automatically creates like users controller, and it knows how to do like users like person people or something.
It does pluralization, but if you creating a model won't create anything else. It just does the model. Where you get into the automatic creation of objects is when, so like in your router, you would have a route for, they call it a resource for users.
Yeah, there was an example when you said resource project and it generated an URL saying projects.
Yeah.
So does it fail sometimes? Like is octopus or something?
No, if I did that, that was just a typo.
There's an inflector like Rails. So
Yeah.
You can set your own inflections.
Okay.
You don't answer all my questions. Yeah, you understand the problem. Yeah.
He's my peer this week, so I'm just used to talking to him.
Another question would be like, could you describe real quick like how data bindings work? Like if you say, like if you create a template saying like hello, comma like full name, and then like change the name of the user, how it will actually like delegate to the view, how it will change it. Will it like re-render the whole view every time you change your name, or it will just render this tiny piece? Or
It'll just re-render that one part.
How?
How?
Yes.
That's,
how does it know which part should it render? Does it like create a bunch of like invisible spans or something?
There's script tags. It puts script tags in the DOM, and that's where it keeps all the information about all the different elements.
They're metamorph tags, right? Or
Yeah.
handlebars.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know the exact specifics. Like, you have to look at the source code for that, which I haven't done. So. It works. That's not new. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, guys.